Welcome to the Elokus podcast, and this is class number 8 in the discourse of Shalach Lecha Anashim, which is the 5th discourse in the overall book that we're learning, B'Shasha Hegdimu 5672. This again is class number 8 in the discourse Shalach Lecha Anashim. Get ready for tomorrow, because tomorrow is going to be class number 9. Now, why is that going to be so special? Because according, if my math is correct, my counting that I counted, tomorrow is going to be the centennial class. Not 100 years, but 100 classes. Since we began the exploration, we're hitting triple digits. If we finish the entire project, we'll probably have, I would imagine, 10,000 classes, something like that. But 100 is a nice, good milestone, and I'm excited. So that's tomorrow's class. Class number 9 in this discourse will complete us to 100. So now, here we go. We are, yesterday, we're holding in the band of this book. This is in chapter 19. This is the 3rd class in chapter 19. In my book that I am using, this is page Lamed. And we left out, we had 2 parentheses that I skipped yesterday, which is probably going to occupy our entire class today, but we continue further. The main thought that we were developing yesterday was the question is, how can we reconcile the fact, the existence of the spheros, of the 10 spheros, that they exist already in a state of gnuzais, in a state of hiddenness in the Or Ein Sof, and yet they don't add anything, and they exist completely mixed with each other, even if they are diametrically opposed forces, because the spheros have completely opposite types of energies, which should really clash and extinguish one the other, like fire and water. And yet, while they exist in the Or Ein Sof, their existence is not contradictory one to each other. They live peacefully together in harmony with each other, without any contradiction, without any intolerance, if you might say, one from the other. They coexist. So how can that be? And his explanation that he gave, we got to the point, is that, and we know they coexist, because even in much lower levels, we learned yesterday, even in Adam Kadmon and even in Akudim, we find that they share the same vessel in lower levels. And higher levels, they're all unified. There's no vessels even, they're just unified. And over here, definitely in the Or Ein Sof, they are in perfect oneness. And they're one with the soul. But again, we can't argue and say that they don't exist, because that would be already a level of the Or Ein Sof higher than the 10 spheres hagenuzais. 10 spheres hagenuzais means that the 10 spheres are somehow already present, but yet their presence is not in any way present. They're present without being present. That's the point. And as we learned yesterday, they exist kind of in a non-existent manner. And in the end, and we gave the example of how the powers of the soul all reside perfectly in harmony with the soul itself, and without adding to the soul more. And also they are in harmony, as we mentioned, one power with the other power within the soul. And the reason for that he gave, even though he said in general it's above our understanding, but what we could say about it is that due to its Edelkeit, as we used the word in Yiddish yesterday. Edelkeit means dakus or zakus, 2 forms of expressions he uses. Dakus means refinement and elegance and subtleness. And the more spiritual something is, and the more spiritual it is, the less it is pronounced the less it is loud and demanding and bold, if you might say. When things become more physical, more expressed, like the powers of the soul, once they go out of the soul and they go into more of an expression, then their express state makes them more present and more and thick and dense, where their contradictory features become far more pronounced. And for that reason, they're at war with each other. But in the state of Edelkeit, in the state of refinement, they're not so in clash with each other. So we're going to start with the second parentheses first, and then we'll go back to the first parentheses. Because the second parentheses is more directly, even though they're both really explaining this, but the second will be easier. Okay, so this is by the line before that was where after he said that Adam Kadmon and Akudim, he said even over there they're all in one vessel. The Kolshkin, and he said this is right before the parentheses, but Orin Seisha Lifnei Atzimtzum, in the Orin Sof that's before the Tzimtzum, and for sure they're one. The Ikar, and the main reason why they can be one at this point is they don't exist. They are there, but they're not there in a state of existence, in a state of beingness. So, right over here, he interjects and he gives an example to that. Like a very abstract idea, that is able to coexist or mix with a concept, an idea that's totally opposite, and yet they can both be sharing the same space, the same words, and the same mind can hold them both. And so much so that you don't even notice you have contradictory elements inside of it. Come on. And he gives an example. What does that mean? Gives a proof to that. Shnei chachamim, two wise men, shetoifsim or seichel echad, ze ba'ofen kach, ze ba'ofen acher. Two great scholars who grasp the light of an idea, this one in one manner and the other one in another manner. So once we speak about two scholars grasping the same idea, one sees it one way, one sees it the other way, it right away reminds us and takes us back to what we learned a while ago when we was discussing Shammai and Hillel. Remember? Shammai and Hillel, the two schools of halachic decision making of Mishnah, the main original developers of Torah Shebaal Peh, of the oral Torah. They studied by the teachers of Shammai and Avtalion, even though they share the same classrooms. Shammai always generally took a stricter approach to life, and Hillel took a more lenient approach. Both of them drank the waters from the same fountain, and yet Shammai's waters, once it was filtered through his mind, came out to be a little more sour, and Beis Hillel's came out sweeter, for lack of a better word. One was more kind, and the other was more strict, even though they have the same concept. Okay, so that idea we discussed earlier. Here the question is, here we're going to talk about not the original idea, how an abstract idea can contain opposites before Shammai and Hillel. Here we're going to talk about something else. If you were to be in the classroom, as soon as the teacher left, and Shammai and Avtalion are sitting over there, and amongst them, not Shammai and Avtalion, Hillel and Shammai, who each one has a different approach now to what they heard from their teacher. And later, when they will teach their students, later might be 10 years later, when they'll each one open up their academy and teach Torah, their teachings would be quite different one from the other. They'll set up a whole different school of Torah approach, and so on and so forth. Yet, if you were there in the original discussion between Shammai and Hillel, each one stating the class with each other, each one presenting what they heard and how they understood, you might walk away, or I might walk away, and all of us might walk away saying, oh, beautiful, they both understood, using a little slightly different words, but generally it sounds like they both say exactly the same thing. Now, they're not saying the same thing. And what's the proof? The proof is in the pudding. You'll find out later, when you'll see the consequences of Shammai's teachings, and you'll see the consequences of Hillel's teachings later in their schools and their offspring, and when they eventually will come out, you'll see how different it was. But because they are in their initial conversation, because Shami and Hillel are so brilliant, when they're hearing the teaching, they're hearing it in such an abstract place. They're sensing it in such an essential way, in such a high level, then in such a non-enclosed, rather, in an unclothed way, in a very pure abstraction, that in the abstract energies, it seems to be the same. You might not even notice, unless the one who's listening into them or eavesdropping, or even they're not just eavesdropping or listening in, is also brilliant. Then you can pick up on the nuanced difference from it. But for most people, yeah, they're saying the same. I hear a lot of people tell me when they start learning a little mysticism, Kabbalah, they start dabbling in Hasidus and stuff like that, and they learn. I'll give you an example to this. They learn Tanya, and there are those who didn't. And again, these are definitely people who did not learn Hasidus really, really deep or much Hasidus. They dabbled a little bit. They also learn Nefesh HaChaim. Nefesh HaChaim is the book by the great saintly scholar Reb Chaim of Volozhin, who is the father of the Musar Yeshiva movement. And he wrote a book in which to counter the fanfare and the excitement of the Hasidic movement. As the books of Hasidism, especially Tanya, was capturing the heart of the Jewish people, those that were not fans or at that point yet accepting of Hasidism, they were suspicious or whatever it is. But however, the Alter Rebbe presented a very, very powerful work that was very persuasive. So there was a book written kind of to balance or to create a spiritual means of service as a substitution to the Alter Rebbe's Tanya. Because obviously it was in a time when people were looking to improve their service of God. I mean, halacha, Torah, the revealed part of the Torah, that was very, very, there was geniuses a lot. But someone who will give you a derech and avodas Hashem, someone will give you a method to serve God, Hasidism was then taking over the world. And Tanya was like an incredible a book of guidance. So the Nefesh HaChaim wrote, Reb Chaim of Volozhin, a student of the great Vilna Gaon, and it was a great opposition to Hasidism, wrote a book to try to guide those who are looking for spiritual growth, but in a way that is not Hasidic. Okay? But he uses and teaches a lot of mysticism. And he discusses in his book certain Kabbalistic concepts that are discussed in Tanya. Primarily discusses the concept of tzimtzum, God's presence everywhere, that tzimtzum is real or not. And so many people will say, oh, Reb Chaim of Volozhin and the Alter Rebbe say the exact same thing. I go, look, they should. And I say, and a lot of times you argue, you're going to argue. No. In Chassidus, it's explained what the difference is. The Rebbe explains what the difference is in a letter and so on. I think the letter is Reb Chaim Hutner. To Rav Hutner, where the Rebbe writes to him. Why am I forgetting Rav Hutner's first name? I've forgotten right now. Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner, I'm sorry. Remember that. When the Rebbe sent Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner a letter, I think it was to him, the difference between the Nefesh Chaim and the Alter Rebbe, because the Nefesh Chaim, the Reb Chaim Volozhin, definitely adapted his understanding of the tzimtzum, and went away from his teacher, the Vilna Gaon. Because of the influence of Hasidus, he altered his understanding. But even after his alteration, he didn't alter it to the understanding of the Alter Rebbe, and the understanding of the way Hasidus understood. But in any case, and what's my proof that, he says the proof is in the pudding. Take a look at the end result. Take a look at the emphasis in the Hasidic world. What's the drive in Judaism? What's the main point? It turns out a very, very different type of Jew than those that are studying in the Musar thought worldview and the Yeshiva worldview is very different than the Chabad worldview. The whole different, even though it's the same Judaism and it's the same observance, but the emphasis is so different. So if one turns, but when you're learning it in the original text and you're reading the original differences of how they're perceiving reality, it's hardly any different. It looks like they're saying the same thing. But they're not saying the same thing. And therefore, as it will come down later into application, it will come down more to earth, it will be a world of a difference. So that's what he's saying over here. That the subtlety of the initial teachings, although Shammai and Hillel are they're essentially opposite ideas, but in the abstraction, the two ideas can sit together and there won't be fireworks. They'll be like almost saying the same words, almost inhabiting the same space, without all the take their students 3 generations later, after it fully is applied to all of its applications, it's fire and water. They'll debate, they'll argue, they'll yell at each other, they'll throw water at each other. They have a whole complete different opinion. It's madness. And you can see the great differences that exist between one and the other. But in its original emergence, it's so refined that you don't see the difference. So this is kind of the idea that he's saying earlier, that the 10 spheros, as they exist in God, as they exist in the Or Ein Sof, because of their subtlety, because of their abstraction, they can both shear the same space without burning each other, because of the dakus and the ruchnius, because of the edelkeit, because of the refinement. So let's read it inside. It's like 2 chachamim that take one light of one idea. One sees it one way. This one takes it. Let's take the Arizal states that there was tzimtzum, a contraction. Comes the Alter Rebbe and understands the Arizal's contraction, the concept of tzimtzum arishan, of the first contraction, one way. And comes the Vilna Gaon, or the Baal Shem Tov understood it like the Alter Rebbe one way, the Hasidic understanding, and the Vilna Gaon, and then later Reb Chaim Volozhiner, and so on and so forth. They understand it in their way, different way of understanding the tzimtzum. But in the original words, they don't look so different. When they relate these ideas on the level of the way they understand it, which means in the level of their essential koach and the essential power of the way they understand it, which is utter genius and depth, where the ideas are in a very undressed manner, which means they're not applying it into something. They're just they're stating the essence of the concept in its purest, most abstract state. And in the very, very depth of their understanding, it's still not noticeable, but how one is different than the other. It looks like, and one can even mistake that they're saying the exact same thing. You can mix them together. You can, in Yiddish you say, you can make a cholent from it. Sometimes you can take, and even when it's a lot of times, if you learn a Maamor, you're learning Chassidus, a lot of times when we don't really give it the full depth of our thinking, I'm sure I'm guilty of it many times, we mix ideas. We take an idea from one discourse and another discourse, and really the Alter Rebbe never repeats the same thing. Sometimes it seems like, he's saying the same thing again. Now we're learning Basi Lagani. It's this time of the year that we learn it, which is the Rebbe's incredible discourse. And once you learn it again and again, he's saying the same thing. He's never saying the same thing. It's but because when we fail to pay attention to the subtleties, it looks like it's the same thing. But it can be a world of a difference. But because it's being said in such edelkeit, in such abstract words, that we don't necessarily see how different it is. Now, Shammai and Hillel, when they're listening to each other, the reason they're debating, the reason they're discussing, is because they realize that the other one understood it different than them, that their understanding is unique, not like the other. So the wise men themselves, this is a parenthesis within the parentheses, this line over here. They know the depth of the idea, upnimiusa, and its very innermost. They are different one from the other. Avol be his gatlus, but on the outside, eino nikar adayin. It's not recognized. I have the difference between them. And it could be mixed together as if they're saying the same thing. However, but when they're not talking to each other, where they can engage in a very abstract conversation, philosophical conversation, but rather each one is taking their perception and needing to teach it to students that are coarser and not as refined. And therefore they need to give more tangible examples. And they need to make it more applicable to life and put it into scenarios. Once they're teaching and applying it to various situations, that's when you see this one says it's forbidden and this one says it's permissible. This one says that you should do so and so, and this one says you shouldn't. Because these are ramifications. But when you're bringing it down into the ramifications, in the applications and so on and so forth, that's when you can see that this is blue and this is red. It's a whole different beast. It's a whole different energy. It's a whole different reality. When it comes down into the lavush, into the garments of understanding, of grasping, that's when you can see how one concept is different than the other. This one took the same teaching. Remember, it's one teaching that they received, one download that they received from their teacher, from Shema and Avtalion, but this one understood it thus, in this way, and this one understood it in a unique way, in another way. Like we find that a very abstract idea that could be understood differently. Like I said earlier, the Tzimtzum could be understood the way that Vilna Gaon understood it. It could be understood the way the Baal Shem Tov understood it, what the Arizal is saying. And like we explained earlier, now is the first time he's bringing the names back. When we discussed earlier in the discourse regarding Shammai and Hillel, both of them received from one teacher, yet it's a world of a difference. It's a world of a difference, their approach to all matters of Torah observance. But they both it's one download they received from one teacher. But you don't notice the differences between them. In Shammai and Hillel itself, you wouldn't notice how they're arguing, but in their school that's why a lot of times you find in the sages, the arguments are only in Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. Now, if it's Beis Shammai means the house of Shammai, or the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel. Because why not attribute it to Hillel and Shammai? First of all, it could be that Hillel and Shammai passed away already by then, by the time this debate came about. But it's also possible that when Shammai and Hillel were teaching, you didn't really notice yet the subtle nuances of the difference. But when it came into the schools of Shammai, schools of Hillel, which are the flocks and the students who are designed and developed by their teachers, there it's very, very different. It manifests and it becomes very different. This will serve as an example in the Orin Seif Baruch Hu, in the infinite even though there is already in the Orin Seif Chachma, wisdom, ubina, and understanding, which wisdom and understanding are two very different type of energies. The chesed and gavura, and there is kindness and there is severity. Also very different energies that clash one with each other. Nevertheless, because as it is in the Orin Sof, the Chesed and the Gevura are so abstract, so non-something, so a non-entity. They are mixed, and they are unified, one with the other. They're not contradictory, and they're not clashing with each other, which you will later see once they come down lower into the process of actualization, and they're into the process of expression and actualization into the world. You can see how this one is leaning in one direction, and this is going off in a complete different tangent, a complete different direction. Okay, I was going to learn the first parentheses too, but all we're going to gain from it is we're going to start it, and we're going to have to go over it again tomorrow. So we might as well, because we don't have enough time for that. So let's leave that for tomorrow's class, Be'ezus Hashem. We're going to go through the first parentheses over here. Going to discuss the difference of fire and water. And okay, we're going to speak about that, Be'ezus Hashem, tomorrow. So today, you got lucky. You got yourself a short class. Okay, let's have Mashiach now.